Hello you guys, welcome back to another travel and crime episode. It is Kaylee here. So in this series, I cover true crime cases or hauntings that happened where we are RVing at the time. And since we're a family of nomads, there is never a shortage of cases or hauntings to cover. So before we get into today's haunting, if you would not mind just taking 1 second to like and subscribe, it would help me out. I would appreciate it so much. So let's get into it. So right now we are staying in Galveston, Texas. And if you don't think, when you're sitting there thinking about like the most haunted cities in the US and Galveston does not like pop in your mind as like a front runner, you're not alone. It was never on my radar as a paranormal hotspot. So when we got here and started just kind of getting used to the amenities and, the things that we needed, grocery stores, things we needed to know about the area, first thing I did was, look for a grocery store. So I find a Walmart. So I go to this Walmart and I see this big history marker across the street, like right when I'm turning in. And it says something about an orphanage. And I was like, that's weird. Like, I don't see anything. And, I'm just doing some grocery shopping. And I get home and I start Googling. And the amount of history that I had just walked through to pick out like our yogurt and milk and things like that, what used to be there and what happened, the horrific events that happened, it blew my mind. It blew my mind. And so I had to do a travel and crime on it. So here we go. St. Mary's Orphanage. We're gonna get into it. We're getting into it right now. And in 1809, the Sisters of Charity was founded by Elizabeth Ann Seton. So Elizabeth Seton was known as the Mother of Charity. So she would send out the Sisters of Charity to open up orphanages or open up schoolhouses, or just really go out and do work that needed to be done for the community. So the Sisters of Charity were amazing nuns. They were an amazing group of nuns, and they would just do this amazing work. So keep that in mind, Sisters of Charity. So several Sisters of Charity were called to Galveston, Texas by Catholic Bishop Claude Dubois in 1866. And he called the Sisters of Charity to Galveston, Texas to mainly start a hospital that would actually be the first Catholic hospital ever in the state of Texas. So these Sisters of Charity came over and they were just taking care of the sick. They were doing the work that they, were used to doing. They did so much good, and that's no different than what they did in Galveston. So they were actually mainly taking care of a lot of people who had caught yellow fever, which was unfortunately very popular at the time in a bad way. It was very contagious. It was running rampant. As well as other injured and sick that were needing their care. With all of this illness, with the Sisters of Charity running this hospital and taking care of all these ill patients, unfortunately, with the high fatality rate, a lot of children were becoming orphaned. And so with that, the Sisters of Charity opened up an orphanage originally in the hospital. And then they decided to move it 3 miles west to a beachfront area. And they thought that that was a good idea, to get it further from the actual town of Galveston, get the kids kind of farther away from, possibly contracting all these horrible diseases that were ultimately taking the lives of so many. They just wanted to take them away, keep them safe. And right now, mind you, like during this time period, Galveston, Texas, the port is hopping. I mean, they have got a booming port. They have got a population of 36,000 people. It's just on the rise, and Galveston has just this promising future. It's growing and growing and thriving and thriving. That was until the morning of September 8th, 1900. There were clouds coming in, and it just kind of looked like a normal storm. There weren't too many people who were too alarmed. The winds were rolling, there were waves, but it was a storm. And if you've been to the ocean, you know how bad they can look. So nothing was too red flagged at this moment, but this would be a detrimental day in Galveston, Texas. Now, one of the Sisters of Charity, so Sister Elizabeth Ryan, she was one of the 10 sisters who was at St. Mary's Orphanage. She had come into town that morning on September 8th to collect some food. And so there were different people telling her, hey, you need to stay here. You need to stay at the hospital until the storm passes. You don't need to be out running around. You don't need to be out on the streets. You've got to stay in. You've got to be safe. The winds are bad, you know. But she argued back and said, no, I've got this food I've collected and I have to take it back to the children at the orphanage or they won't have any dinner tonight. So she braved the storm and went back. Little did she know that whether she did that or not, that would be the last dinner at this orphanage. Then here comes the afternoon. So on September 8th, you know, the morning, it's stormy, you know, people are kind of trying to stay inside, but it's not too crazy yet. And then afternoon time, it's getting bad. So people are kind of starting to get the hint that, okay, I think we need to get a little bit more alarmed here. Now the rain is increasing, the waves are crashing, and some of the residential areas are starting to get flooded. So St. Mary's Orphanage, it consisted of 2 large 2-story dormitories, and they were just off of the beach behind a big row of really tall sand dunes. And they were supported by salt cedar trees. And then these buildings had balconies that were facing the Gulf. So before they knew it, these waters were reaching the dormitories. So the sisters took all the kids to the girls' dormitory, which was the newer of the 2. So all the kids are being taken to the girls' dormitory. It's stronger than the boys' dormitory since it's newer. So they're just trying to keep these kids safe. And they can kind of hear the destruction happen. And then they hear the other dormitory just get taken away. It's being swept away and it's right next to them. They know that it's really bad out there and there's nothing they can do. So then the sisters are trying to think, what can we do? This is bad. We've got to think of something. So there was another staff member at the orphanage and the sisters sent this staff member to get some clothesline. And each sister took this clothesline rope and they tied themselves around their waist to between 6 and 8 children apiece. So it was their way of staying together. And so it was a really valiant effort, but unfortunately it would be fatal. As you may have guessed, the dormitory that these kids and the Sisters of Charity were using as their sanctuary, trying to stay safe, it ultimately collapsed. And the floor went out, it just crumbled to nothing. And unfortunately, all but 3 people died. This moment, this time in history, just in this particular spot, it took the lives of 90 orphans between the ages of 2 and 13 and 10 nuns. There were 3 survivors. William Murney, Frank Madera, and Albert Campbell were the only 3 survivors of the St. Mary's Orphanage that day. Everyone else died. So these boys actually survived. They floated on a tree for more than a day. Once they floated on floodwaters into town, they were able to tell the other sisters what had happened at the orphanage. Guys, that's just one tiny area. Now where the Seawall Walmart is, that used to be St. Mary's Orphanage. That's where it used to be. And so just with that storm, it's called the Great Storm of 1900. It was a huge hurricane, one of the worst in US history. This great storm took the lives of more than 6,000 people. More than 6,000 people. An official death count was never tallied. The tidal waves of this massive hurricane were said to reach between 15 and 20 feet. If you just think about 15 to 20 feet, I can't imagine. And the winds from this hurricane were said to be anywhere between 150 and 200 miles per hour. That's massive power. So now let's get into the haunting part. Now that you know the backstory, the haunting will make more sense. This Seawall Walmart, if you ever come to Galveston, Texas, make sure to check out the historical marker across the street. But I'm gonna tell you that when you go into this Walmart, it doesn't have an eerie feeling, but after you hear the story, just be on the lookout. And you've got to drop in the comments if you know anybody who has been to this Walmart and experienced anything paranormal. or if you yourself have, I'm so interested, because I've gone to the grocery store like 3 times a week, just like trying to, you know, keep my ears and eyes open. So there's an article that I was reading through, and I will put it in the description box below for you to read through. But in this article, they interviewed a former Walmart employee who worked at the Seawall Walmart. They were asking this former Walmart employee, you know, have you ever seen anything? Have you ever heard anything? Have any stories? And this lady had said, you know, there was one time in particular where she had heard a little girl crying. She was crying for her mom. And she said that, you know, she was looking all over for this little girl, and, you know, she couldn't find her. So then she had gone to another employee, and she's like, hey, can you come help me find this little girl? I hear her crying for mom. We need to find her. Let's work together. And so the other coworker's helping, and they can't find her. So they were rallying customers. Like, anybody who's walking by, they're like, hey, you hear that? Everybody's, yeah, I hear that. Where's she at? And so she said that there was a point where, you know, she's looking in one aisle, coworkers in this aisle. So they're in these opposing aisles, right? And this person is yelling over. She's like, hey, you know, she's over there. I can hear her. And then she's yelling back, no, she's not over here. She's got to be on your side. Because it was right there. She was right there. They just couldn't see her. Other than that, it's a weekly thing where like whole shipments of toys go missing. Toys are constantly thrown off shelves. A lot of stuff in the toy aisle. A lot of crying. Something else to note, the Sisters of Charity, remember how they were tied to the kids with that clothesline rope? So they were actually buried wherever they were found, and they were actually buried together with the children that they were attached to. So it's a whole thing. There is so much history here, you guys. I'm going to try and cover as much as I can while we're in Galveston, because there are so many stories that are so similar to this. There was so much destruction the day of the Great Storm in 1900 that so many places were destroyed, so many lives were lost. Literally more than 6,000 people died that day. 3,600 homes were destroyed. 10,000 people were left homeless. It put a halt to everything that Galveston was growing towards. And yeah, it was one of the most catastrophic events in, I know, Galveston's history. So the Seawall Walmart, we are here now. We go there every week. I will for sure update you if I catch any paranormal activity. I'll go in there with my Ghostbusters goggles and whatever else I need to do. But yeah, it's a really cool story. It's so rich in history here. I'll link all the articles I used down below. I hope you guys enjoyed this story. It was more of a story. I know there's a little bit of a haunting in there. It is haunted, but there is a lot of history leading up to it. I hope you enjoyed that. I know I love stuff like this, so I hope you enjoyed it too. If you guys wouldn't mind just taking a second to like and subscribe, I would appreciate it. And drop in the comments. I'm in Galveston, so any true crime cases or hauntings, or, you know, kind of creepy historical stuff that leads to a haunting, whatever ties into it, whatever makes it interesting. I like today, you know, going through the history that led to a haunting, and I think that's kind of cool to get the background so you can get the whole gist. But whatever you guys want to hear, I'm here to cover, so drop it down below. I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Y'all have a good one.